Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024, and on the show today, we are going to talk about some biochar trials I have started. We'll get a question about farm resilience, and Coach Jesse will join the show. That's me, but with a different hat on. A proverbial one. Anyway, let's do it. Okay, so it is garlic planting season for us. I usually have all my garlic in by now, but this year I decided to start a daily podcast instead, like you do. And so I'm running a little bit behind on stuff, but also I'm just taking my time now, more than I would have in the past, and setting up better trials. All of my trials heretofore have been way too anecdotal and haphazard just because I've been entirely too busy to really track them. But that is changing now. Now I'm going to take my time with these trials and perhaps obviously share what I learn with you all here on the show. So my garden trials are going to be a huge part of this daily show in the spring and summer next year. We haven't fully fleshed out exactly what our farm plan is for the 2025 growing season yet, but we are going to continue pulling back. That much is known. A bit more so I can explore some of the ecological ideas I've had bouncing around in my head. I want to breed a more heat-tolerant lettuce. That's going to be a focus. I want to trial biochar. I want to compare different organic fertilizer options, different compost treatments, different plant spacings. I already talked about incorporating more trees, and the planning process for that is underway, which I plan to share here as well as it comes together. Jackson, the host of the Collaborative Farming Podcast, which went up this morning, you should check it out. They did a farm tour. It's very cool. And the same Jackson who helped me co-found No-Till Growers. Anyway, Jackson and I have always dreamed of having a research farm, and that's ultimately what I'm kind of going to be doing with my home farm to some extent. Well, at least to the extent that someone as busy as I am can. We will still sell to local customers, obviously, and we've always trialed a lot of stuff, but the balance between those two things will shift a little more in favor of the nerdery next year so that I can actually monitor my trials. Of course, this will hopefully be a huge benefit to you all, as I will share my trials here freely for anyone and everyone to listen to or watch if you're on YouTube. And if you can kick in a few bucks via patreon.com/no-till-growers, that's even better. Ensures more trials, better trials, all that stuff. Anyway, back to the garlic and biochar trials. First, I don't want to assume everyone listening knows what biochar is exactly. Biochar is a specially made kind of charcoal that can be produced in a few different ways, but is typically created by heating carbonaceous material like wood chips, but could also be animal manure or leaves or corn husks or whatever, using a process called pyrolysis, which is a fancy way of saying that it is heated to a very high temperature in a low oxygen environment to retain the carbon, unlike an open fire where much of that carbon is lost. Now, what does that have to do with us as farmers? Well, there is some evidence that biochar makes a pretty decent soil amendment. Of course, there's also some evidence that it can have no effect at all or even have some negative effects. And for some reason, I was like, that sounds good to me. Let's give it a whirl. In other words, I wanted to find out for myself, in my context, if biochar was something I could be using. So here's one way I am testing that particular idea. The biochar I'm using is from a company called Foop, whom I may actually visit soon. And the trial is basically that I am taking my garlic beds and adding biochar to about 40 bulbs in each bed. The garlic trial is 4 beds and 3 different varieties. And I'm trialing biochar in my overwintered leek bed on that one variety I talked about earlier, where I'm trying to breed a leek that will last over the winter in the field. Anyway, I did all that so I could get a good sample size from a few different beds to see if there is any difference. My plan is to compare emergence, growth, and overall weight, including stems at harvest of the garlic, and see if I can glean anything from that data. For the leeks, I just want to see if those particular leeks survive the winter better than the ones that were not treated with biochar, percentage-wise. Now, if there is a difference in the biocharred and non-biocharred beds, then I will continue my trial next year and add some soil testing and nutrient sampling to the mix to just kind of get a better idea of what's going on. I may actually do that anyway, but there is a reason I'm calling this a trial and not a study. At the end of the day, despite my best efforts to forget it, I'm still a farmer who has only a farmer's amount of time and money to put into these things. Your Patreon support, though, definitely makes these trials more possible and could make them more interesting. This one may or may not be replicable for you, but perhaps other trials I do in the future with biochar, especially as it pertains to maybe amending potting soil with biochar for better nutrient retention and those sorts of things. Maybe those will come in handy one day. Oh, and this is somewhat unrelated to the trial, but if you ever want me to investigate a common gardening idea or mantra or amendment or planting strategy or whatever, let me know. There are a lot of things that go sort of unquestioned, but I'm more than happy to do the questioning. Patreon members especially, let me know in that October show thread what you all have questions about. Even if it's just what's the best spacing for X crop. And I'll look into the research and see what we got. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. And when we return, we have a question about adapting to unstable climate conditions. You know, something light and fun, per usual. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. If you, the listener, want to support our work, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from anywhere and everywhere that questions come from, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Hopefully this show saves you that $2 or $5 per month that you contribute there through farming advice, or maybe it just provides a single conversation starter for you. Like, here are the top 5 things I learned about soccer from my favorite farming podcast. Yeah. I mean, that alone could be a $10 icebreaker at the next company picnic, assuming that your company's not just your partner. Anyway, today's question comes from Patreon member Magdalena, which is a very fun name to say. Magdalena writes, I'd love to learn more about adapting to unstable climate conditions, droughts, torrential rain, wind, especially water management, irrigation in heat waves and droughts, adjusting species grown, etc. Thank you, and Patreon members can add questions to the October show thread or wait for the November show thread, which is coming right up already. All right, so obviously I covered some about farm resilience in the video I posted on Sunday, but I am going to take a slightly different approach to this question here today. A lot of what I discussed in the video I posted on Sunday was about bigger picture stuff and social stuff and markets, etc. So with this format, I feel like I can get slightly more technical. Let's take this question bit by bit. First, adapting to potential or ongoing droughts. I think it is important to have access to multiple clean water sources. There is quite literally nothing more critical to life than water. As I've said before on this channel and elsewhere, when searching for life on other planets, scientists look for water for a reason. Whether your sources are a well and a pond and county water and or a water catchment system or creeks and so on, it is good to have multiple sources in case one goes down or one empties out and you need another one. You should always have some amount of preparation in place for any potential disasters. But if you are at all in danger of like serious drought, find your water and lock it down. You cannot grow food without water. It is an essential part of life, and it is an essential part of photosynthesis, which managing photosynthesis is what we do. So have a multitude of options. Be the crazy cat person, but instead of cats, make it water options. And at least one cat, of course, because cats rule. The system by which you deliver the water will both manage the amount of water you have, but also how well it is distributed to the plants. I like to think of plants as pseudo water suspension mechanisms who will, at least temporarily, convert water into something that won't just trickle off or burn off. So you having the irrigation able to properly deliver the water is crucial in drought-prone areas. I really recommend at least giving the pulse watering episode I did with Jenny Love a listen, which I will link in the show notes, along with the interview that Jenny Love did about that same subject on her own podcast, No Till Flowers. Last thing on drought resilience for the moment is that your soil management practices, from mulching to cover cropping to just consistently keeping beds in production, will help those beds in their general water holding capacities. Pouring a bunch of water on poorly managed exposed soil is just a really labor intensive way to waste water. So if you're going to be using a bunch of labor anyway, may as well be using it to make the soil healthy instead of fighting weeds and compaction all the time and then recreating it and then losing that water through heavy tillages and excessive plowing, etc. To keep with the sort of itemization of Magdalena's question, they also mentioned preparation for torrential rain. Heavy torrential rain events are happening at higher frequency for many people, depending on the region you live in. According to a study published in the journal Nature, 75.9% of land area in humid regions shows an increase in flood intensity, while semi-humid areas are showing a 68.7% increase and semi-arid regions show around 63.4% increase. Of course, I'll link that study and any other citations used in the show notes as always, but sometimes those are fascinating to look through because you see the many different mechanisms such as tree rings and climate data and etc. that they use to compare to study the climate history of specific areas. That's fascinating, it's fascinating to me, assuming that you're just as nerdy as I am. Anyway, the other trend is that there is a lot more rainfall in the Northeast U.S., less rainfall, though heavier rain events in the West, and then a ton of variability / unpredictability in the middle of the country. Voice of experience here. That means for people like me here in Kentucky, somewhat more in the middle of the country, we will occasionally have, 70 plus inch rain years, which like we did a few years ago, which is like, 1,800 millimeters of rain or something in metric. So we can get that. And then we can get down to whatever we will finish with this year, which I think is currently closer to 30 or 35 inches, also known as half. The fluctuations are just really wild and unpredictable, but when it rains, it very often and very angrily pours. And so for some of us, we have to find ways to prepare our farms and soils for both drought and torrential rain simultaneously. So that's fun. If you are on land with poor drainage, it is better to plan for wet than plan for dry because you can reconstitute and rehydrate that land easier than you can drain it on the fly. There are several types of natural drainage options depending on the intensity of the issue, which I will dive deeper into at some point, from French drains to ditches to berms to simply raising the beds in mildly poorly draining soils. Again, good soil practices will likewise help considerably by increasing the soil organic matter, which is the conductor of soil moisture, letting it pass through when it gets to be too much, but also holding onto the water for when the moisture starts to dissipate, like conductors do. It's quite enigmatic, this soil organic matter stuff. As I mentioned in that video, try not to put your gardens in a floodplain if you at all have a choice, which of course not everybody does have a choice, but if you can avoid it, it's better. It's just safer. Also, like I mentioned in that video, there will be disasters that are almost impossible to account for, like Hurricane Helene hitting that far inland. Only so much you can do to prepare for something like that. Now to the question about wind. Wind breaks are critical in wind-prone areas. Like if you are on a ridgetop and your area has any chance of high winds, start with getting those wind breaks in place almost immediately. For us, the prevailing winds come from the southwest, but that isn't necessarily universal. Heck, it isn't even always that way for us. During the hurricane, they were coming out of the east, which was super exciting, change of pace. It happens in the summer too, but in the winter, they often can come bitterly screaming out of the north. But by and large, protect your gardens from where the majority of the wind comes from. I like trees over artificial options, but perhaps a windbreak / deer fence would make that investment sting a little less. If you have a choice in building locations for sheds and barns and housing, etc., you can consider having those also as windbreaks, the structures themselves for the garden, so long as they are not themselves made more vulnerable and so long as they are not blocking too much sunlight. Last, on the plant selection part of the question, most plants are bred for resistance to something like blight, pests, whatever. They are not generally bred for any sort of climate resilience necessarily. There are a few exceptions like heat-tolerant lettuce and slow-bolting cilantro and etc. There are also crops like Malabar spinach that are good in the heat or other crops that perform better in the cold. But the best way to get climate resilient seeds and plants is to do a small amount of your own adaptation. This is not always possible for farmers, and you do not have to do this for every crop, but sometimes as growers, we shy away from this idea because it feels a little too daunting and complex to add to the already daunting and complex lists we have to accomplish, which I totally get. I feel that too and have for 15 years. However, oftentimes when you purchase seeds, you are getting seeds bred and grown out in exceedingly different climates than where you are. And it's hard to say what we're missing because of that in terms of production. An example is garlic I grew out from a friend in California. They had sent me some as a gift, and it was absolutely exquisite when it arrived, and so I decided to plant some to see what would happen. I lost almost all of it, while my other garlic was just ruling. It just couldn't be happier. And what did survive didn't exactly thrive. However, last year I replanted what had survived, and almost all of those bulbs survived this past season. So this year I'm replanting them in my biochar trials to continue adapting that crop to our wet, obnoxious, cold Kentucky climate. Now, garlic is not seeds exactly. It doesn't act exactly the same way because it's a clone, but different genetics are triggered by different situations. But how much production and quality do we miss out on by using seeds from who knows where? All that to say, support at least a couple local seed purveyors to help increase the potential for resilient plants. And while you're at it, adapt some of your own. And just while we're on the subject, slide over to no-tillgrowers.com and pre-order a copy of Dan Brisebois' new book, The Seed Farmer, which is all about growing seeds in the market garden context, and pre-ordering it helps to support this work. So that's like a double win. I will put a link for that in the show notes with all the other links, just so it's not lonely. Anyway, I hope that answers your questions a bit more in conjunction with that video from Sunday, Magdalena. Up next, your halftime or midweek talk. Be right back. Hey, y'all, Farmer Jesse here. I just wanted to let you know that we have posted a bunch of discount codes over at our Patreon page at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers for our patrons over there. So if you love and appreciate our work and you could use a little break on the cost of seeds this year or on your irrigation supplies or boots or whatever, we have several discount codes available over at our Patreon page. Like I said, patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. So, just to be clear, that means for as little as $2 a month, you can save hundreds of dollars on your farming stuff this year. That's real. That page is so valuable to our work, and at a certain level, we'll even shout you out at the end of this show. Because you rock. That's it. Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the show. Okay, so if this is the first time you've watched or listened to this podcast, you should know that I am a dedicated youth soccer coach, and I approach soccer coaching with the same nerdy enthusiasm that I approach farming. And pretty much everything else. So get ready. But I also like to combine those two worlds when I see some relevant crossover, or sometimes when I don't see any relevant crossover, but really want to. We'll see which one this one is. Anyway, the thing that's been on my mind lately is jargon and keywords. In soccer, when we're training a team, we use a very specific language through the training session, the practice, called keywords. And often, the better the coach or the more experienced the coach, the more dialed in these keywords are. So for instance, if I'm trying to teach the kids how to pass a ball forward between a few defenders, we call this breaking the lines. So as we are doing an activity, a drill, but we don't call them drills, we call them activities. So as we are doing an activity where we want them to pass the ball between defenders in front of their teammates, we will repeatedly say, break the lines when we want them to pass it, and not just pass it. The reason is that pass it can mean a million different things, but break the lines means something very specific. It's a forward pass between defenders to hopefully create a breakaway situation. So from their coaches or their teammates, as they are in the game, someone can yell, break the lines or break it, and the kids will know what they should be doing. So how does this relate to farming? Well, soccer coaches put a lot of thought into the language we are using because it will serve that player for many years to come, as we are all using relatively similar language with some inherent nuances to each team, but mostly similar. But also it's about ensuring what needs to get done gets done without confusion. It's just really efficient, especially when you're in a soccer game, when you're having to make thousands and thousands of decisions really quickly as a player. So my question is, as farmers, and specifically as those who own farm businesses with employees or farm schools with students or host paid internships or apprenticeships or whatever, are we being thoughtful about the language we're using and efficient with it, or are we generalizing too much and putting too many things under the same umbrella, saying pass instead of break the lines? So the word harvest would be an example. Telling someone just to harvest something could be, and maybe should be, more refined if you want it to be done consistently and correctly. If you want the arugula cut with the quick cut greens harvester into a specific bin, for instance, is there a way to wrap those directions into a keyword you can tell someone instead of having to explain the expectations all the way through every time? You don't have to overthink it or get too creative with it. It could be as simple as saying, I need you to quick cut the arugula on bed 8, hand cut the Salanova on bed 10, and then 4-bunch the beets on bed 2. Then you could have a simple chart on the wall for them or anyone to refer to in case they forget that quick cut means use the quick cut greens harvester to harvest a crop into collapsible bins. Or the keyword 4-bunch means you want roughly 4 to a bunch of that item. Or it could sound completely different on your farm. A lot of keywords are pretty well established in soccer in a way they are not so much in market gardening. So a lot of soccer coaches use those same terms and so the kid will run into the same or similar terms throughout their life. That would be nice in farming, but also it gives you the opportunity to create your own language and jargon around your farm. Soccer is pretty much the same everywhere, but farming is not so much. Context is much more everything in farming than it is everything in sports. But the value in the keywords is not necessarily that the keywords will serve that person for the rest of their careers, though in soccer, that's largely true. And it's not just about efficiency, but accuracy. You're not just saying pass the ball, but exactly how, with the fewest possible words. Or, as usual, maybe this is completely unhelpful, but either way, I know you will let me know. Otherwise, I am going to wrap it up there. I hope you all are enjoying this show so far. If you would like to better understand my soccer analogies, the Major League Soccer MLS playoffs started this week, so plenty to watch. I am an FC Cincinnati supporter, so that's who I will be rooting for if you want to join me in that, although we lost our entire defense to injury twice over this year, so not holding out a ton of hope. But if you just want to tune in and watch Messi and Busquets and Suarez and Alba play for Miami, that's fine too. Like and subscribe or follow if you are not already. Please consider joining us at patreon.com/no-till-growers if you'd like to support this work. That thing has been hopping lately, so I take that as a good sign. I genuinely have no idea how people feel out there in the world about this show, but I do hope you're enjoying it at least a little bit. Supporting it through Patreon is definitely the biggest compliment and positive sign, and I appreciate all of you dearly for signing up over there. And at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one Patreon level to another Patreon level, or this month, anyone who signs up gets a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Helen Stathers, Brock, short for broccoli, Paige Stevenson, Andrew Andrew, did you sign up just so I'd have to read this name? I think you did. Andrew Statue? It's a cool name. Not sure I'm saying it right. Patrick Moore, Bill King, Amy, just Amy, Byron Green, Chris Yates, and Stephen Smith. Huge shout outs to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. Otherwise, we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye. Not sure I said tomorrow correctly.